So imagine you're just standing in front of your pantry, right? And you reach for a bag of potato chips.
Yeah, a pretty standard Tuesday afternoon.
Exactly. And in that moment, you feel entirely in control of that decision. You are the CEO of your own life, simply choosing a snack.
Right. Feels completely conscious.
But what if I told you that choice was actually made for you? Like made by a combination of the microscopic hormones you were exposed to before you were even born, the specific dopamine sensitivity of your neurons, and literally the zoning laws of your city.
I mean, it completely upends how we view ourselves, honestly.
It really does.
We cling to this comforting illusion that our conscious mind is firmly in the driver's seat. But the deeper you look at the science, the more you realize that our conscious choices are very often the consequence, not the cause, of incredibly complex motivational states.
It's like we're just responding to invisible strings.
Yeah, exactly. We are responding to invisible strings.
Which is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We are taking a massive stack of research covering everything from physiological homeostasis to psychological conditioning and even urban planning to answer one fundamental question.
Right. Who or what is really pulling those strings?
Yes. So by the end of this conversation, you'll understand the mechanics behind why your diets usually backfire, why you can intensely crave things you don't even enjoy anymore, and how your environment is quietly manipulating your desires right now.
It's a lot to cover.
It is, yeah. So to figure out how these complex desires operate, we have to start from the inside out, looking at the most basic survival mechanisms. Like, we really have to talk about homeostasis.
Right. Well, homeostasis is the foundation of everything we do. I mean, your body is an active, highly tuned machine designed to maintain a constant internal state.
Because our lives literally depend on keeping certain biological metrics exactly the same.
Right. Exactly. The brain operates within a shockingly narrow window. Like, if your brain temperature drops by just 10 degrees Celsius, you lose consciousness.
Yeah.
The whole system just shuts down.
So the body acts like a thermostat in a house.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
And the research points to a region called the hypothalamus acting as the literal neural thermostat. So when your core temperature starts to stray from its set point, the hypothalamus detects it and doesn't just trigger physiological responses like shivering or sweating. It triggers psychological motivations.
Right, creates this sudden, intense desire to go put on a sweater.
Yeah.
And the mechanism is just really elegant because it forces your conscious mind to solve a biological problem. Thirst is actually another perfect example of this forced motivation.
Oh, the thirst stuff was fascinating.
Yeah, but the literature breaks thirst down into two distinct mechanisms that operate differently. We have extracellular thirst and intracellular thirst.
Okay, break those down for us.
So extracellular thirst is relatively straightforward. It's really about a loss of overall fluid volume. Like if you are sweating profusely on a hot summer day or you lose blood from an injury, your blood pressure physically drops.
Makes sense.
Right. And receptors in your kidneys and your heart detect that drop in pressure, and they send a panic signal up to your brain saying, fluid levels are critical. We need water immediately.
But the intracellular thirst is the one that really caught my attention because the research used this classic example of eating salty food at a bar.
Oh, yeah, the pretzel effect.
Yes, you haven't been sweating. You haven't lost a single drop of water. But halfway through a bowl of pretzels, you are absolutely dying for a drink.
Right. And the driver there is the mechanism of osmosis. So when you consume heavily salted food, the concentration of salt in your bloodstream just spikes. Now, water naturally moves across cellular membranes from areas where it is plentiful to areas where it is relatively scarce. Because your blood is suddenly saturated with salt, it actively draws water out of your body's cells to dilute it. And that includes the neurons in your brain.
Wait, it's like a paper towel sucking up a puddle of water on a counter.
Yes, exactly.
The salty blood literally pulls the water right out of your brain's neurons, and they physically shrink, and that structural change triggers the alarm for thirst.
Yeah, your neurons literally become dehydrated, and they scream at your conscious mind to go get a glass of water to restore that delicate homeostatic balance. I mean, it is a brilliant self-correcting system.
I mean, I'm tracking with the thermostat idea, but there is a glaring loophole here.
Oh.
What's that?
Well, if our bodies are such perfectly tuned, self-correcting machines always seeking homeostatic balance, why do I drink a third cup of coffee when I know it's going to give me the shakes?
Right.
Yeah.
Or why do we constantly eat past the point of being full or get addicted to substances that are actively destroying our internal balance? Like that completely contradicts homeostasis.
Yeah, that is the exact pivot point where the science of motivation gets significantly more complex.
Yeah.
Because those internal drives for balance, they're only half the equation.
Okay.
The other half is the magnetic pull of the outside world, which we call incentives. So to understand why we routinely do things that throw our perfectly tuned systems out of balance, we really have to look closely at how our brain processes rewards.
Right.
For the longest time, science operated under the assumption that wanting something and liking something were the exact same neurological event.
Yeah, they were just lumped together under the umbrella of reward. But the research details this massive paradigm shift, proving that wanting, which is termed incentive salience, and liking, which is conscious pleasure, are actually controlled by two entirely separate systems in the brain.
Right. And measuring that separation in a laboratory setting required looking at universal biological responses, which basically comes down to facial expressions.
Right, the lip smacking.
Yes, humans, non-human primates, and even rats share remarkably similar facial expressions for pleasure and disgust. If you place a drop of something sweet on the tongue of a human newborn, a monkey, or a rat, they will all smack their lips and relax their facial muscles.
Oh.
But conversely, if you give them something bitter, they gape their mouths and display disgust. These expressions give us a really reliable, measurable language for when an organism actually likes something.
And the research maps that liking response to these tiny areas in the brain called hedonic hotspots.
Exactly.
And those hotspots use natural opioids to generate that feeling of pleasure. But the actual drive to go get the thing, the wanting, is controlled by a completely different pathway. The dopamine system, traveling from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens.
Right.
And the way researchers proved these are separate is incredible. Didn't they engineer mutant mice to have super high levels of dopamine?
Yeah, they did. And these mice learned how to navigate a maze to get a sweet Fruit Loop at record speed. Like their wanting drive was off the charts.
Wow.
But when researchers observed their facial expressions while eating the Fruit Loop, they didn't smack their lips any more than the normal mice. They didn't actually like it more. They were just relentlessly driven to get it.
That is wild.
But the inverse of that experiment is even more revealing. So researchers took normal rats and chemically destroyed their dopamine neurons. They basically eliminated the wanting system entirely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And without dopamine, the rats completely lost the will to eat or drink. They would voluntarily starve to death with a pile of food sitting inches away from them.
Because the drive was just gone.
Exactly. But if the researchers intervened and placed something sweet directly into the mouths of these dopamine-depleted rats, they still smacked their lips.
No way.
Yeah. They still displayed the opioid-driven liking expressions. The capacity for pleasure was fully intact. But without dopamine, the motivation to seek out that pleasure simply didn't exist.
The implication there is huge for our daily lives. I mean, it perfectly explains why you might mindlessly eat an entire family-sized bag of potato chips, even when you realize the last 20 chips didn't actually taste good.
Right, exactly.
Your hedonic hotspot stopped liking the chips 20 minutes ago, but your dopamine system is still firing, screaming, want, want, want.
Yeah, the dopamine system can operate completely independently of actual enjoyment. And, well, when you look at the extreme end of this hijacked dopamine system is at the very core of drug addiction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The literature presents two leading, really well-researched theories on the mechanics of how addiction permanently alters behavior. The first is researcher Kent Berridge's theory of neural sensitization.
Okay, what does that one say?
So Berridge's research suggests that addictive drugs structurally alter and hyperactivate those specific dopamine neurons. As a result, long after the physical withdrawal symptoms have faded, the addict's brain remains permanently sensitized.
Wow, permanently.
Yeah. It produces this exaggerated compulsive wanting for the drug, even if the addict builds up a tolerance and no longer actually likes how the drug makes them feel.
Right.
The wanting circuit is just permanently cranked
Yeah.
to maximum volume.
Which isolates the behavior entirely from pleasure.
Right.
But the sources also detail George Koob's anti-reward, or the dark side theory, which approaches addiction from a different mechanical angle.
Last bit different.
Because Koob frames addiction as a three-stage cycle driven by negative reinforcement. Like, as the brain gets flooded with these artificial dopamine highs, it tries to protect its homeostasis by recruiting stress systems, what he calls anti-rewards.
Exactly.
So over time, the motivation flips. The addict is no longer taking the drug to achieve a high. They are taking the drug purely to escape the intense, crushing emotional and physical pain generated by their own brain's stress response.
Right. They are literally fleeing the dark side. And we look at these two theories impartially, as the scientific community is still exploring the overlaps. But both Berridge and Koob's models illustrate the same terrifying reality.
Which is that conscious choice is systematically overridden by these hijacked brain circuits. The environment, through the vehicle of the drug, just rewrites the internal hardware.
That's it, exactly.
And we see this dopamine hijacking happen with drugs, but the exact same neural circuitry is targeted by something we literally need to survive, which is our modern food environment.
Oh, absolutely. Food is where our biological homeostasis and our cultural environment violently collide.
Right. From an evolutionary standpoint, our tastes were hardwired as a survival mechanism. Sweetness wasn't just a flavor, it was a biological label for safe, dense calories, and bitterness was a warning label for toxic alkaloids.
Yeah. Our brains evolved in an environment of scarcity, so we are biologically mandated to seek out those dense calories. But our biology also utilizes this fascinating mechanism to ensure we get what we need, known as allisthesia.
Allisthesia.
Yeah. It's the phenomenon where a homeostatic internal deficit physically alters your sensory perception of the outside world. So if you are starving, food doesn't just sound like a good idea intellectually. It physically smells more potent and tastes significantly sweeter than if you were fully satiated.
So your internal state actively modifies the external incentive value to guarantee you pursue it.
Exactly.
And the brain is running complex calculations to manage this all the time. It's monitoring our immediate glucose levels, while the liver acts as this master accountant, keeping track of our overall long-term nutrient stores.
Yeah, it's a massive feedback loop.
And all this data feeds back into the hypothalamus, which acts as the gas and brake pedals for hunger. The research notes that if there is damage to the lateral hypothalamus, the gas pedal is broken, and an organism will just starve itself.
Right.
But if there is damage to the ventromedial hypothalamus, the brake pedal is destroyed, leading to voracious eating and extreme obesity. It's basically a mechanical system regulating our body weight set points.
Yes, and the concept of a biological set point is crucial, especially when discussing human obesity, because the scientific consensus points heavily toward biology and genetics, dictating how our bodies process calories.
Yeah, they detailed that landmarked twin study.
It illustrates this mechanism perfectly. So researchers isolated sets of young male identical twins and overfed them by exactly 1,000 calories a day for 100 days. They completely controlled the environment to ensure total compliance.
So everyone ate the exact same excess amount.
Right, and across the entire group, the variation in weight gain was massive. Like, some men gained 9 pounds, while others gained nearly 30.
But the breakthrough was looking at the pairs themselves. Within the identical twin pairs, they gained the exact same amount of weight, and their bodies deposited the fat in the exact same physical locations.
It's wild. And the mechanism at play involves differences in metabolic adaptation and non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. Right, so some genetic profiles respond to excess calories by subconsciously increasing tiny movements, like fidgeting or posture adjustments, which just burns off the extra energy.
While other genetic profiles efficiently store every excess calorie as fat for future survival.
Exactly. The twins prove that biology largely dictates how your specific machine processes fuel.
Which completely reframes the concept of dieting. Because if your body weight is aggressively defended by a biological set point and metabolic adaptation, going on an extreme diet is basically like trying to cool down your house by taping an ice pack directly to the thermostat.
That is a great analogy.
You aren't fixing the heat, you're just tricking the sensor. The furnace is just going to kick on and work twice as hard to fight you.
Yeah, because from an evolutionary perspective, extreme dieting is interpreted by your brain as a catastrophic famine. And the mechanism to survive a famine is to drastically lower your metabolic rate to conserve energy and simultaneously prime your dopamine system to obsess over food so you will binge the second resources become available.
So when extreme diets fail, it is not a lack of willpower.
No, not at all. It is millions of years of evolutionary survival mechanisms functioning exactly as designed.
But, the conscious drive to fight those deep biological mechanisms is incredibly strong, and that brings us to the cultural side of the equation. The research dives deep into eating disorders, illustrating how cultural messaging can override homeostasis.
Right.
They break down objectification theory, which suggests that when a culture frequently treats the female body primarily as an object for visual consumption, women internalize that observer's perspective. It creates self-objectification, where you are constantly viewing and monitoring your own body in the third person.
Yeah, and to measure the actual mechanical impact of this, researchers designed this brilliant study analyzing cognitive load.
Oh, this study was mind-blowing.
It really is. They brought college students into a lab under the guise of evaluating consumer products. Participants were asked to try on either a bulky sweater or a swimsuit, alone in a dressing room with a mirror, and then, while wearing the garment, complete a highly complex math test.
Right.
The male participants' scores remained pretty much consistent regardless of what they wore. But the women who wore the swimsuit performed significantly worse on the math test.
Because their mental RAM was entirely eaten up by body monitoring.
Exactly. The cognitive load of self-objectification and the shame induced by the environment literally diverted the mental resources required to solve the math problems.
Ooh.
And furthermore, after the test, the participants were offered a candy bar. The women in the swimsuit condition were far more likely to restrict their eating and refuse the food. The culturally induced body shame directly overrode their biological drive for calories.
Just the environment rewriting the hardware again.
Yeah.
And the sources point out how cultural beauty standards have shifted wildly, from the curvier 1950s ideal of someone like Jane Mansfield to the ultra-thin modern ideal of Nicole Kidman. That arbitrary cultural shift literally alters how people feed themselves.
It's powerful stuff.
It really is. And this collision between our internal hardware and our external environment, it doesn't stop at what we eat. It scales up to how we develop our deepest identities, particularly human sexuality.
Right.
And just like hunger, the foundation starts with biology. Early in fetal development, prenatal hormones, specifically androgens, play a massive role in masculinizing both the physical genitals and the developing brain.
Yeah, the interplay between prenatal hormones and socialization is highlighted by two contrasting case studies in the literature. The first is the famous Dominican Republic study.
Okay, tell us about that one.
So researchers observed a unique population of genetic males, XY individuals, who carried a specific genetic androgen insensitivity. Because their bodies couldn't process the male hormones in the womb, they were born with female-like external genitals and were raised entirely as girls, completely socialized into female roles.
But biology had a delayed reaction. Right.
Exactly. At puberty, a massive secondary surge of male hormones caused them to rapidly and physically masculinize.
And the critical observation was how they reacted psychologically.
Right, because the vast majority of these individuals transitioned seamlessly into male identities and traditional male roles within their society. In this instance, their underlying biological blueprint, activated at puberty, completely triumphed over the way they had been socialized and raised as children.
But you kind of can't talk about that without contrasting it with the tragic circumcision accident case where socialization failed completely.
Yeah, that case is heartbreaking, but important to the science.
Right. In that case, an infant boy lost his penis in a botched surgical procedure. And on the medical advice of the time, he was given a sex change operation, treated aggressively with female hormones, and raised strictly as a girl. He had no knowledge of his biological birth sex.
Right, and if human identity were purely a blank slate written by the environment, this socialization should have worked.
But it didn't?
No, it did not. As a teenager, despite being raised entirely as a female, he experienced profound psychological distress, deep confusion, and exhibited heavily masculine traits. He eventually rejected the female identity entirely and transitioned back to living as a male.
Wow.
It demonstrates that you cannot simply overwrite a biological reality with environmental socialization.
But it's fascinating because when it comes to adult human sexuality, the research notes that our day-to-day behaviors are actually much less dependent on hormones than other mammals. Like, most female mammals are bound by the estrous cycle. Their sexual desire is strictly tied to their fertility window.
Right, they don't have a choice.
Exactly. But human sexuality evolved to be largely independent of those strict hormonal fluctuations. It is heavily dictated by emotional bonds and, crucially, cultural boundaries. You have highly restrictive societies like the Kuna of South America on one end, and incredibly permissive societies on the other, dictating how the biological drive is expressed.
Yeah, our biology provides the drive, but the environment builds the track it runs on. And this applies to sexual orientation as well. Keeping strictly to the scientific data presented, orientation exists on a continuum, famously modeled by the Kinsey scale. The scientific consensus is clear that sexual orientation is not a conscious choice. A major study conducted in San Francisco sought to identify what childhood factors actually predict adult sexual orientation, actively debunking myths of seduction or recruitment.
And what they found was that the single strongest predictor of adult homosexuality was a concept called childhood gender nonconformity, meaning that girls who were highly masculine tomboys and strongly avoided typical girls' activities, or boys who strongly avoided typical boys' activities, were significantly more likely to identify as gay or lesbian in adulthood.
Yeah, the mechanism points to deep, early developing roots for our orientations, laid down long before any actual sexual behavior occurs.
Wow.
It just reinforces the theme, right? Much of who we are is established before our conscious mind ever gets a vote. And if we broaden the scope even further, human needs aren't limited to just biological imperatives like food and sex. We have profound social needs, like connectedness and privacy, and self-oriented needs, like autonomy and aesthetics. Which brings us to the macro scale of motivational science, which is the work of Dr. Matchkin Benioff and urban planning.
Yeah, this is where the research takes such an incredible turn, because our cities are so often built as concrete grids designed for economic efficiency, completely ignoring those social and self-oriented psychological needs.
Absolutely.
And the research from Francis Couot and a Dutch research group proves that the literal physical design of your neighborhood manipulates your internal state.
Yeah, they study the impact of green spaces and trees in dense urban environments. And they found that the presence of nature doesn't just offer aesthetic value, it acts as a biological regulator.
Like mechanically.
Yes, the mechanism is profound. Exposure to green spaces actively engages the parasympathetic nervous system and significantly reduces circulating cortisol levels. By physically lowering the population's baseline physiological stress, they observed measurable drops in aggression and violent criminality.
So the trees are basically acting as a buffer for the human nervous system.
Exactly.
If you take the trees away, the stress compounds, the dopamine systems get more erratic, and behavior changes.
The environment literally regulates our internal homeostasis on a population level. I mean, we are a continuous collision of biology and environment. The conscious mind is frequently just the final narrator, trying to make sense of a story that was already written by our neurochemistry, our genetics, and our culture.
We started this deep dive looking at the literal thermostats in our hypothalamus keeping us alive. We moved through the dopamine circuits dictating our cravings, explored how our bodies adapt mechanically to the calories we consume, and zoomed all the way out to the cultural beauty standards and the literal zoning laws of your city that shape how you feel and act.
It's a huge picture.
It really is.
Yeah.
We've learned today that our wanting dopamine circuits can be hijacked by everything from heavily processed junk food to cultural messaging, completely separate from what we actually like or value as individuals. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've seen how easily our desires are manipulated by internal chemistry and external environments. If science eventually develops a way for you to perfectly recalibrate your own brain to sever the wanting circuit for things you don't actually like and make you only crave what is truly good for you, would you do it? And if you stripped away all of those biologically and culturally hijacked desires, well, who would be the person left underneath?